Hello, everyone, and welcome to Lungarno Chats. I'm very excited for today's edition. I'm here with Consul General Benjamin Wohlauer, Consul General of the United States here in Florence, and also Jane Farrell, Deputy Editor of the Florentine, who will be here and provide us with a Florentine forecast. Before we get started with the interview, I'd love to just share some recent observations with you. We'll begin just highlighting a couple of partners. The Florentine, obviously a great institution here in Florence, has done a tremendous job, especially in the last couple of months, keeping the community informed and translating the decrees, and just being an extremely valuable source of information. Just like lots of other businesses, they've been hit by the lack of or loss in revenue. So I encourage everyone to support the Florentine and subscribe. Their content is just getting better and better. And also I'd like to salute the British Institute, which was our original home for the Lungarno Chats. They've done a very admirable job of moving their content online with their cultural series. Now they've expanded that. There's going to be a panel, which I'm honored to be on tomorrow, that discusses Firenze now, what's next for Florence after the pandemic. So I'll be joined with a very distinguished group of panelists. And now I'd like to share a few recent observations.
What may be the new normal? This is an amazing concert that I came across in Barcelona. So after being closed for 3 months, the El Liceo Opera House in Barcelona held this performance of Puccini's Bicentennial for about 2,300 plants. It was the idea of the artistic director there, Eugenio Ampudia, and he thought it was important to sort of give a path back to life and reaffirm our value for life, art, music, and nature. And after the performance, all 2,300 plants were then given to all the men and women fighting the pandemic on the front lines. So I don't know about you guys, but how many of you feel like this when you're trying to get to your Zoom meeting? So working from home certainly hasn't been as easy as one would think. And there's one interesting company, Bolito, that builds prefabricated housing, and now there has an emphasis on prefabricated offices, so a place where you can work, play, or just simply get away. This is how they can deliver. It's as easy as having a crane that can put one of these offices on your roof or in your backyard. The entry level for one of these is about $33,000. But you can fully customize them and build some amazing things. I would definitely choose the Casa Invisible, so to really camouflage and blend into your environment and be hard to reach. This is another interesting company. This is called Cody. They're sort of an in-between between WeWork and Airbnb. So these are people that have repurposed their residential space that provide a place where you can work, and there's a set of amenities, that they offer, such as Wi-Fi, coffee, kitchen space, parking. But I think to really gain traction and make this take off, I think they need to install some of these Stouffer's Mac on tap machines. So the dispenser for mac and cheese. This is actually a real product that Stouffer's come out, and I love the innovation coming out of the lockdown phase. And just a reminder that July 14th is the National Mac and Cheese Day. So we'll definitely be celebrating it, but to not horrify our Italian friends, we'll probably just tell them that we're going to have pasta e quattro formaggi, 4 cheese pasta. thought that the idea of personal space is being redefined, and this is called the Bubble Shield. It's a Milan-based company called Design Libero, and this is a backpack that has solar power, that's solar powered, and that inflates, and it keeps away germ-filled droplets, pollution. It has a fan, and then it folds neatly back into the backpack. But I thought I found something way cooler. It obviously works at airports too. And my wife Diane doesn't know yet, but I thought that this summer we're going to travel stress-free and fully protected. So I ordered a set of these suits for the family. So if you do spot us going through any airport or our train station, please do come say hello. So other innovations that have come through during this lockdown period. One of these companies called EHang, and they received the first authorization to actually test flights with passengers. They're in China. And this is a significant advancement in aviation and autonomous aerial vehicles. And as we talk about air travel, the recent times we've seen some really fantastic advancements in space travel. So this is the cockpit of the Space Shuttle Endeavour that flew between 1992 and 2011. And this is the recent SpaceX Dragon cockpit that just made its first mission to the International Space Station. And besides the technological advancements, what gave me great hope was the astronauts that were met by their Russian colleagues on the International Space Station, and it just gave me a renowned optimism and hope in multilateral, multinational organizations and continued cooperation. Now, another interesting phenomenon that's happening in these days is, if you remember back in October, we talked at the Lungarno Chat about how Twitter was the first major platform that banned political ads. Google quickly followed about a month later and restricted political ads, and we were wondering and speculating what would happen with Facebook. Well, Facebook hasn't really taken any meaningful action right now as far as curtailing this sorts of advertisement, and so now there's a boycott campaign called Stop Hate for Profit that's led by a handful of civic organizations. But now it's grown to over 160 companies that include Verizon, Unilever, Coca-Cola, and even Starbucks did not officially join the boycott, but they are suspending advertisement for the next 3 months. So just on Friday alone, Facebook saw its market cap fall by about $56 billion in valuation. The frustration really reached the tipping point during the recent Black Lives Matter protests. But they also are facing stiff competition in the form of a new wave of spontaneous community apps. So this is probably the fastest growing one, which is called Clubhouse. Clubhouse is very secretive. They don't even have a website, even though there's a different company called Clubhouse.o. It's not the social media app, where it's basically a audio-based social network where you can follow people and then spontaneously jump into a voice chat that you like, and you can see how many people are following. And there's lots of these apps now that are gaining traction. And you can see there's a whole ecosystem of companies being funded and growing quickly that are supporting these community-based apps. And lastly, this is an app that I love, a website I love, and I wanted to make sure that Ben was aware of it for his continued travels. So this is a visual sort of search engine for radio stations that are streaming. So you can pretty much navigate with your cursor all over the world, pick any of these green dots, and then choose from any of the radio stations that are streaming. So here's one from Florence and one of Boston's, two of Ben's hometown, so that he can stay connected even when he moves on to his next destination. And now I'd like to introduce Jane Farrell, Deputy Editor of the Florentine, presenting the Florentine forecast, which covers all notable events happening in Florence right now. And Jane, it's always a pleasure to have you. You always contribute so much to the Lungarno Chats. And after Jane, very excited to have Benjamin Wohlauer back to Lungarno Chats. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Morgan, for such an interesting talk, as always. I'm very happy to share our events lineup this month because there's more of them in person for the first time in a long time. So what I'd like to share with you first is Kevin Francis Gray at the Stefano Bardini Museum. He's a Northern Irish artist who is displaying his works in Florence for the very first time this year. The works take the 17th century classical tradition and really cast that away, delving into something a bit darker, which of course is a strong juxtaposition with the rest of the works in the Bardini Museum. So that will be on display until the 21st of December, and it's certainly an exciting body of work to come to Florence. The next one I'd like to share then is Hershey Felder. He's an internationally renowned pianist, actor, and playwright who will be performing live from Florence, his series that broadcasts his one-man show from his home here in Florence, based on Beethoven, which he's written himself and which he will be performing from his home. That will be on July 12th, and I suppose it's a way to take part in an event online if you're not able to get here just yet. The next one then is a little bit more active. It's the Run for Mire Virtual Challenge. This will take place from the 9th to the 12th of July. Essentially, when and where you want within that time period, you run 5 kilometers, and the money raised will be in aid of the Mayor Hospital in Florence. So €10 are required to take part in this as a donation, and an additional €5 will have a courier sprinting to your house with the official T-shirt so that you can take part. And there'll also be an official application for this so that you can see your time and compare that with your friends. The next one then is the 21st International Italian Brass Week Festival. And for the first time ever, only online. This edition is called A Cosmic Breath, focusing on power of air, really, I suppose, and brass instruments, of course. And it's very much the best of brass music. But in addition, there will also be some well-known names such as Leonardo Romanelli, and giving some little discussions on food and wine, as well as somebody contributing inserts about art. So really, it's a varied lineup for the week and plenty to take part in there, as well as masterclasses that are run by leading educators that are free, run on Zoom, and have no limit on participants. So that's incredible to see that thousands will be able to get the top class music instruction for free from their own homes. So that's certainly an exciting initiative. And then the last one is something which is certainly a highlight of the summer for many, and that is cinema in the city. You have plenty of choices this year, one of which is the Spazio Alfieri in the Chiostro of Santa Maria Novella, in place of their usual screenings outside the Uffizi Gallery. And for the full lineup of where you can see cinema in the city, our most recent edition of the Florentine will be publishing a full list, and that is out this Thursday. So you can get your hands on a copy of that. You'll be able to see when and where you can catch us in the screening under the stars. And there's certainly many wonderful memories to be made here in Florence in the summer, catching a movie with your friends and enjoying just sitting in this most spectacular city. And so thank you so much, Morgan, for inviting me to be part of this, and looking forward to hearing your discussion now.
Great. Thank you so much, Jane, and Ben. Thank you again for joining us.
It's great to be here.
So as your term wraps up here, I can't imagine that you expected that your last 3 months here would be so turbulent and unexpected.
Yeah.
Can you just walk us through the last couple of months, maybe back to February or even January? When did you start hearing about the pandemic, and just both personally and in your capacity as Consul General?
First of all, it's great to be back here with you, Jane and Morgan. It's been a while, so and obviously in a different format the last time we were together, but this is a fantastic initiative, and we're always excited, the Consulate is, to participate. The other thing I'd like to note is on the mac and cheese question. We've actually served mac and cheese, real American mac and cheese, to our Italian guests, and they all had seconds, 2 portions. So I take that as a clear signal that American cuisine is superior. No, but seriously, it's obviously been a very, very strange for everybody several months. Consulate, of course, in the same boat as you all and everybody else in all sectors in Italy and in the United States. You know, the first awareness I had of it was the last weekend in February, coming back from Bologna, and the train was packed, and we couldn't understand why the train was so crowded. And it was because they had just canceled Carnevale in Venice. Oh, wow. So the train was filled with people who were coming back. And, you know, of course, we were starting to get the news in from colleagues up at the Consulate in Milan about what was happening up in Lombardy, concerns over staff, Consulate staff well-being, some folks living in the hot zones up there. So that was when we first started getting involved in it personally and as a diplomatic mission. I think the assumption at the time was that with the disease spreading so rapidly in Lombardia and into northern Emilia-Romagna, that it would, you know, before long cross the Apennine and be down here in Tuscany and Florence. So, you know, we immediately started to plan and think about how we might deal with that. As you know, we estimate about 50,000 American citizens resident primarily in Tuscany. You know, at that point, there still were about 7, 8, 9, 10,000 American students mostly in Florence, but also throughout the consular district. You know, the spring semester had just started a couple of weeks before. The tourists had been a bit less anyway, as we remember, as the disease was unfolding in China. You know, there was already some concern about travel globally, so that there were fewer tourists, to be sure. But we were concerned, and, you know, we immediately started planning. You know, we have a pretty robust emergency action plan. We drill crisis management regularly. In fact, I'd just done one in the previous December, not on a pandemic, but on other issues. So we started to put into effect some of our crisis management response activities, and really try to, first of all, understand what was happening in Italy, and you know, then make sure we had the tripwires up so that if it spread into Tuscany, we would know and be ready. And you know, after that, our #1 priority, of course, was getting out information. There was a lot of information floating around, not all of it accurate, and not all of the people just didn't know exactly what was happening. So that was an important challenge for us as well, to try to find reliable sources of information so that we could communicate with the American citizen community here, which is our primary role, but also, of course, report back to Washington so that the policymakers back home understood the dimension and the gravity of the crisis here, and adjust their policies accordingly.
I remember Stanford and NYU here in Florence were some of the first ones to basically say, we're closing the campus, and all the students had to go home. And I think a lot of us thought that they were being a bit alarmist and sending maybe the wrong message. Obviously, they were prudent and right to do so, but I guess they were following a lot of the State Department travel advisories and what level they were. Can you just talk about that a little bit, how that impacts, like right now we're at level 4. How did that trigger some of those decisions, and how involved is the consulate?
Well, I mean, each university and American institution, and of course personal decisions, will have their own level of risk tolerance, and usually they will also have crisis management plans that say, you know, if the U.S. government or if a foreign government makes determination X, then our action Y is immediately taken. I don't know the cases for individual universities, the ones you mentioned, or others. But certainly, as the warning levels, the travel warning levels from the State Department and the CDC began to rise, first obviously with the situation in China, and then as it spread into Europe, I suspect that the universities were following those, and at first recommendations, and each level the recommendation becomes stronger and stronger. The U.S. government is never in a position to order people to leave. It's not something that we could do or that Americans would follow necessarily. So, but at a certain point, we do reach a level, that we're at the highest level now, both for the State Department travel warning, which in this case covers, is in place because of a pandemic, but could be in place because of terrorism or a war or anything else like that. But at that level, we are issuing our strongest advice to not travel. And as you know now, at first it was country-specific warnings, and then it became a global warning to discourage people in the strongest terms, Americans in the strongest terms, from traveling anywhere.
Yeah. So Italy was obviously one of the main epicenters for it. And what was the U.S. response to Italy? I saw in the papers lots of interesting initiatives of just solidarity and all sorts of different help.
Well, I think, the important thing to remember, and this is a message that I try to deliver whenever I can, sort of a broken record, is that, the American community is extremely diverse, especially in Florence, Tuscany, and Italy. So, there's the official U.S. government response, which has been quite robust, considering Italy, is a G7 country. We don't normally do assistance programs for developed countries. But, the U.S. government has already committed more than $50 million to mostly health system recovery in Italy, across the country, as well as about $10 million that we're putting towards private sector development or recovery due to the for problems that they've suffered because of the COVID crisis. But that's just a piece of the puzzle. Throughout the crisis, American investors present in Italy contributed themselves more than 50 million euros in cash, but also in kind. For instance, right here in Florence, Eli Lilly contributed a large, about €1 million worth of insulin to the Italian healthcare system, along with a lot of the personal protective equipment. Also, Nova Pignone, Baker Hughes, similarly provided a contribution. Rufino, which is a friend of the show, and also owned by an American company, raised a significant amount of money for healthcare systems in this part of Italy and in Veneto as well. And then even Rocco Commisso, right? Everyone's favorite American here in Florence, raised a tremendous amount of money, including a large sum that he contributed personally for response here in Tuscany and Florence, directly to hospitals. So, there's the private sector part of the American role. And then, the U.S. military not only is providing some of the official assistance, but the base at Camp Darby, which is outside of Pisa, played an important role. It's a logistics hub, so it played an important role throughout the crisis in routing needed healthcare supplies to Lombardy. So, the American community is large, it's diverse, even without the most evident representatives of our community, the tourists and students in Florence. There's a tremendous presence and a presence that's very, very committed to its adoptive country and adoptive region and city, and is playing a role throughout trying to help.
So it sounds like the bilateral relationship is still quite strong.
Oh, no doubt about that. Yeah, the relationship, because I've been in the diplomatic service for 22 years, and I've never worked in a country where the relationship is so organically strong. We share a culture, we share values, we share a history, tremendous linkages through immigration and family ties, present company included. And so it's you know, the official relationship is also quite warm and friendly, but even when there's tension between the two governments, the foundation of bilateral ties is so strong that it's almost hard to imagine our bilateral friendship not being one of the most important in the world.
And last year was an important year, celebrating the Bicentennial.
Right. So last year we celebrated the Bicentennial of the Consulate, which is a big deal for the U.S., second oldest diplomatic mission in Italy after Naples. And what we wanted to do with the Bicentennial, aside from have fun across the district, was really to underline that message, which is the American community is large, it's diverse, we have long and interesting history together, we've always been there for each other in difficult times. And so we wanted to travel around and uncover and tell some of these stories about past chapters, but also explore what the American community is doing now, and talk together about where we want to take it moving forward. We weren't predicting, of course, a pandemic, but regardless, it's we're going to be together and work together, come what may.
Fantastic. Florence has possibly had too much of a good thing, and their economy was, I would say, over-reliant on tourism, which obviously has proved to be a fragile model. And you've had a very interesting perspective, because under your purview you have Emilia-Romagna and San Marino. Sure. And I was just wondering, even though we're 30-minute train ride away from Bologna, how different the economy is there, and how specialized some of their industry and how advanced they are. Are there anything that maybe Florence or Tuscany could learn to have a more balanced economy? Do you have any thoughts on what the recovery could look like?
Well, you're never going to catch me comparing Emilia-Romagna and Tuscany. You can ask me when I'm done with my position here, and I'll speak up more frankly about it.
Whose food is better?
Yeah, but no, I mean, I think everyone has recognized that the dependence on tourism and we're talking about the center of Florence. I mean, Florence as a province is actually a very diversified economy, but reliance on tourism, reliance on any sector is problematic. On the other hand, who could have ever predicted this? So it's sort of a bit Monday morning quarterbacking to say that was a mistake. But I think there have been some interesting media pieces and newspaper articles written comparing Bologna and Florence, and the way that their tax structures had been set up over the years, where Florence has been able to rely more on revenue from the occupancy tax, from other fees and taxes that come from the tourist sector, and so have had slightly lower taxes on the community at large, whereas Bologna has had a more kind of sort of equilibrium or sort of a more broadly spread tax base. So that was one thing that I was interested to read about. But I think the diversified nature of an economy in general tends to help in times of trouble an economy bounce back faster. That said, I mean, the situation in Bologna and Emilia-Romagna economically is also difficult, because Italy and these two regions in particular, Tuscany and Emilia-Romagna, are quite export oriented, are quite globalized, are very internationally focused regions of Italy. So naturally, even if the economic situation on the ground is okay, which it's not, but even if it were, you depend on your customers in other parts of the world being in a position to buy. And so that there's a long road ahead. And of course, when you talk about production in Emilia-Romagna or Tuscany, but these very high-end global leading producers of various types of machinery or other equipment, they depend on pretty complex and long supply chains as well. And so that also is something that manufacturers around the world are going to have to come to terms with
Just the interdependency of the supply chain.
Interdependency and just reliance, right? I mean, if a key part is in a country that is really being hit by the crisis, so that the factory that produces the widget you need is closed down, what do you do? Yeah. And we saw that for the production of healthcare equipment during the crisis, that the supply chains really came under a lot of stress, and in some cases temporarily broke.
So as far as the mission of the consulate, I think generally people understand you're here to sort of safeguard the U.S. citizens here, U.S. interests here, but there's also an important component, which is trade, right? Can you talk a little bit about when you arrived here 3 years ago, what were kind of your main goals and how you spent most of your time?
Right. So, I mean, the consulate, since 1819, we've been here to serve the American community, and that's individuals, that's companies, organizations. I mean, that's the reason why Congress gives us a budget every year to operate here, and that will always be our top priority. But as you say, I mean, the economic ties between Tuscany, Emilia-Romagna, and the United States are very strong. Trade, but more investment, and that's been something we've tried to focus on quite a lot over the last 3 years, which is promoting Italian investment into the United States. And so we've worked a lot with the Confindustria Firenze, Toscana Nord, others in Tuscany, and also up in Emilia-Romagna, to bring together entrepreneurs here who maybe have invested or are thinking of investing in the United States with representatives of American states. The federal government in the U.S. plays a relatively small role in promoting investment. It's really the state governments that do it. So we've been trying to put them together to bring deals to the United States, and it's been quite successful. I mean, the shutdown has obviously taken us back a little bit, but I think what we've seen over time is even small companies here who export a lot to the United States, sooner or later, in order to be closer to their customers, they'll want to have some kind of physical presence in the U.S. Maybe it's a sales office initially, maybe it's a service center, but sooner or later, a production facility. So we've been trying to reach out to those smaller companies that are exporting and try to get them on that track as early as possible and be helpful to them proactively, introduce them to states proactively, so that they can.
So does it depend on what type of company is, like what state you would direct them to?
Well, we try to be as neutral as possible. So for us, any sector in any state is a win. We're glad for any investor who wants to come in and create a single job. That's good news for us in the United States. So what we try to do is again, look for the export-oriented, well, either companies that have already invested in the U.S. and encourage them to expand their presence, or, as I was saying, companies of a certain size that are already exporting to the U.S. and talk to them about the advantages of investing and put them together with a wide number of states so that they can kind of speed date through them and find ones where there's a synergy.
Interesting. And is it also vice versa? So I'm an American company and I'm trying to expand my market, and I'd love to, Italy is an important market. You also help them find buyers here?
So if it's an American exporter, we do. So an American exporter will come to us or to the embassy looking for help in finding a distributor or finding a customer. We will certainly help with that. American companies that want to invest, generally we don't sort of guide them through the process or help them. That's really the role of the Tuscan regional or the Italian government. But once they're here, we try to maintain good contact. Obviously, they're not obliged to register or otherwise be in contact with us. But we're certainly here to be helpful. If an American investor runs into any difficulty, bureaucratic difficulty, or has questions, we're always here to offer advice to them. As I said, our primary goal is serving and protecting the American community, and that's not just protecting their life and limb, but also their interests, economic and otherwise. So it's a major priority for the consulate.
I can imagine. So you had been stationed in Milan before. You're familiar with Italy, but in the last 3 years, were there any surprises that you had?
Well, except for the pandemic.
Besides the last 3
that was a big surprise. Well, I mean, I have to say that there were no great surprises because, as I said before, the relationship between the U.S. and Italy is quite stable and quite positive. And in particular, the closeness that exists between Tuscany and the United States is always been intense. Again, the second oldest diplomatic establishment in Italy. There's a reason why we set up a consulate here when we had very few consulates, especially outside of port cities. So that is quite remarkable. So I wouldn't say there were any major surprises. I was very happy to see our efforts to promote more economic ties and investment go so well. I mean, we hypothesized that there was an appetite for investment in the U.S., and so we were pleased to see that bear fruit.
That's great. I just want to ask anyone that has questions, please go ahead and post them, and also mention where you're watching from, and then at the end we'll open it up for.
And you can ask anything.
Q&A. Just a side random thing. I think I learned from one of your interviews that 10% of the residents in San Marino have dual citizenship.
Right. Yeah, so San Marino is a part of our consular district. The ambassador in Rome is accredited there, but we handle the day-to-day affairs. Yeah, San Marino, we've had a very, very strong bilateral relationships, at least since 1861, when San Marino gave honorary citizenship to Abraham Lincoln. And there's a fantastic exchange of letters between the captain's regent, who are the heads of state there, and Abraham Lincoln. Where the captain's regent wrote, it was during the Civil War, kind of saying, well, we're really sorry about the war, it must be difficult, but from as the oldest republic in the world, we send our greetings and support in this difficult time. And Lincoln wrote back, as of course he would, this incredibly powerful, moving letter. So I recommend you look that up and read the exchange. It's quite moving. But yeah, I mean, we have this moving towards the modern day. We have a very strong relationship, in part due to immigration, that there were many San Marinese who went to the United States after the Second World War or right before the Second World War, and then returned to San Marino in the 50s and 60s when the economy was recovering. So we have large San Marinese communities in Detroit and in New York City and outside New York. And then, yes, about 10% of the population in San Marino now has dual citizenship. So we often go there to offer our American services to them. But it's a fantastic country with an incredibly long history that we respect.
Fantastic. So I have I guess just sort of a broader question around the global state of affairs and globalization. I know we have not that much time, but I'm just curious your thoughts. I mean, we're obviously bombarded by a lot of negative media, and one would think that the world is maybe heading towards or getting worse when a lot of the underlying statistics actually would say otherwise. What are your general thoughts on, there's been a lot of efforts after World War II to sort of set up these multilateral organizations that provide stability and help with prosperity around the world. Are they still functioning, or what would you gauge as the health of these organizations and the network of stability right now? Well,
I mean, obviously I couldn't do this job if I didn't believe in and support and be a booster for international linkages and globalization. And I do think that that stories of its demise are greatly exaggerated. I think that the administration now is focused on really taking a hard look at international organizations, not just to sort of get rid of them willy-nilly, but to explore whether they're continuing to do the thing that they were set up to do. I mean, the world has changed tremendously since 1946, 47, 48, 49, when these were established. So I think the idea is to, with like-minded, democratic, free countries, to take a hard look and make sure that they're all functioning as they should be, and that reforms are undertaken if need be. I think that globalization is kind of a done deal. The This isn't going to be sort of
We're not going to go back.
the Great Depression, smooth Hawley tariff times. And just two examples of it during the crisis, where the COVID and the economic impact and great uncertainty and pessimism and travel restrictions, the investment continued to flow. We had the story of Menarini, the great pharmaceutical company from Florence, making an investment in the United States during that time. There's a company in Bologna called GVS that also made an investment during that time. And so, I think that the global economy continues to purr. Obviously, travel restrictions make it difficult, and hopefully they'll be lifted as soon as possible. If anything, the question of supply chain, I think, will be debated, and sort of the next sort of chapter in globalization will be, how can we consolidate supply chains a little bit? But that may or may not reduce the amount of globalization. I think it's probably also going to encourage a lot of companies to make investments abroad, because you want a supply chain that's close to your consumers, right? So American companies that are producing for the European market, may want to have their supply chain in Europe, so they'll move something from China to Poland, or open a factory in Italy instead of in Vietnam, and vice versa for Italian companies. We think in order to be closer to the American consumers that are important to a lot of sectors in Tuscany, that that might be something that encourages them to take that step and invest another link in the supply chain in the United States. But we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see. I'm prognosticating.
And what drew you to diplomacy?
Well, I've always been interested in the world growing up, and it started really as simply as that, just trying to find a career that would let me travel and experience different cultures, and then to combine that with the chance to work for my country and support the things that the United States stands for. To me was a really attractive combination of factors. So it's really the only thing I've wanted to do, and even if I didn't get to serve in Florence, I still would consider it the greatest career. And if anyone's out there thinking about a career change, we are still testing, and we're still hiring. So please do keep us in mind, and students as well. We have a great internship program. It's all on www.state.gov, careers.state.gov in particular. So check it out. And it's an amazing way to see not just Florence and Italy, but some very interesting parts of the world that you might not be able to visit easily on your own, but play a really important part in the global story that's unfolding.
So we're sad that you're going to be leaving.
Me too.
But you have an exciting job in Cambodia.
Absolutely.
How is that job going to be different than your responsibilities here?
Well, so in a nutshell, we have an embassy in almost every country in the world, and that's where the ambassador works, the personal representative of the president, and the embassies are responsible for direct relationships with the government. So our embassy in Rome speaks to the Italian government. Some countries we have consulates, in Italy, obviously, which is more focused on working with the American community, businesses, promotion in that part of the country. So in Cambodia, we just have an embassy. So I'll be going back to working at the national level on issues of import between our two governments. And it's an interesting time. Asia is fascinating to me. I've spent about half my career in Asia. So I'm excited to go back. Sad to leave here, but excited to head back to Southeast Asia and get back involved in some of those issues. Economic ties always important, but things like human rights, freedom of the press, these are big issues that we fight for in that part of the world, and so it'll be fun to focus on those.
It's a 3-year assignment.
3-year assignment, yeah, almost always 3 years for overseas assignments.
And then do you go back to Washington you don't know?
Hard to say. Yeah, about a year out, we do our process of selecting and being selected for an onward assignment. So I'll be back to Italy one way or the other. That I can guarantee you.
Fantastic.
Whether you want me or not, I'll be back.
I have more questions, but I wanted to just see, Jane, if we might want to share any questions from the audience.
Thank you first for such an informative talk. I learned a lot more about your role there that I wouldn't have realized, so thank you for that. We do have a few questions, one of which is from Simon, who has asked, have you any thoughts about when the American study abroad programs might start up again in Florence?
Sure. Hey Simon, thanks for writing in. So, you know, it really is going to be dependent on each university and each program. That, as you know better than I do, the American university and student presence here is also very diverse. So you have large universities like Stanford, NYU, Syracuse, Kent State that have their own programs here. Then you have sort of aggregators that offer spaces for students from a number of different universities. So it's going to depend on the decisions being made by dozens and dozens of different universities in the United States. I think probably in the fall, we won't have too many American students roaming around for just a number of reasons. As I said at the beginning, I think a lot of the universities look at the CDC and the State Department travel warning levels. Also just logistical challenges with traveling now, with getting visas to Italy. You know, the ban on entry by Americans is obviously a huge impediment. But you know, we are hearing a lot of interest from students, from universities. I think there really is the desire to reopen as soon as possible, and that, you know, I don't get a sense that there's really a great fear of coming back, as long as certain things can be, you know, kind of organized ahead of time. Also, you know, ensuring that American students here, and I think this will be important for tourists, to encourage them to come back, to make sure that, you know, it's clear how they might get access to the healthcare system, how they might be tested, what to do, you know, if you have someone who tests positive, how do you quarantine, you know, foreigners here who are only here for a short time, you know, maybe they're not here on a long-term visa. So these are bureaucratic, logistical things that certainly can be ironed out, but the desire is there. So my prediction is that you'll have a small number in the fall, but a much better turnout come February.
That's optimistic, at least. I guess patience, but we'll get there. And then we have another comment from Helen of the Florentine, who has said, thank you, Ben, for your driven and dedicated term in office here in Florence. That's something we all can concur with. And she has also thanked you for all your interesting reading matter, which you published in the Florentine during the bicentennial year. So you've answered about where your next destination is, but the second part of the question, perhaps you could answer, is there anything you would have liked to have achieved, but were unable to do so during your time in Tuscany?
Yeah, well, thank you, Helen, and thank you so much to the Florentine, which has always been front and center in working with us and supporting, in particular, our Bicentennial Insieme 200 initiative last year. I mean, you are the authoritative voice for the English-speaking community in Tuscany and outside of Tuscany, wanting to be in Tuscany. So
thank you
for your friendship and support. You know, there's always more to do. We have a small team here. And the American interests in Tuscany really are wide and deep. So there's always more that we could be doing and could have done. You know, I think exploring more, you know, we did some good work, I think, with the American nonprofits like Friends of Florence, Advancing Women's Artists.
Yes.
And, you know, what I'd love to do more of, and we tried to do some, but I'd love to have had a bit more traction on it, was to get their message out. And also in terms of American students doing community service work, you know, try to get their story out a little bit more. Because, you know, my contention, and this gets, I think, lost in the shuffle sometimes, or maybe Tuscans just get used to Americans and don't think about it. But the contributions that Americans make, either financially or in terms of their time and volunteer service, every day is really remarkable. And so as a consulate, we have sort of a platform, a bully pulpit, to maybe get that message out a little bit more. So, you know, I would have liked to spend a bit more time really trying to work out a strategy where we could engage the media and get that out. But maybe my successor will want to take that on, or maybe the Florentine wants to take that on.
Maybe the Florentine, who knows?
You don't even have to pay me for that idea. You can use it.
Well, thank you for that. If we have time for one last question, perhaps we could finish with Diane, who has asked, what does the transition plan look like as you leave your position? Will you have overlap with your successor? And there's another 2 questions in here. Perhaps you'd like to answer those first?
Sure. So transition plan, the State Department has kind of a masochistic tendency of not having overlaps.
Right, okay.
It's sort of like a trial of strength or something like that. But my successor will arrive about 10 days after I leave. So he will be here relatively soon. So there should be very good continuity. Of course, we have an amazing team of Italian employees here who actually do all the real work and maintain all the important connections. So you won't even notice I'm gone, but she'll be here soon, and I know is super eager to meet everybody, and even though it'll probably be virtually for a while. Greatest accomplishment is hard to say. I was lucky to be here during our bicentennial year because I felt like what was very gratifying to me is we don't have the resources to put on a big 200th anniversary year-long extravaganza. So we sort of put the word out to our friends around the district and said, look, this is coming up. We'd love to work with you on this if you're interested in organizing an event or proposing something. And the response was really, as I said, gratifying and heartening. So that wasn't really my accomplishment, but it was probably the most gratifying thing over the course of 3 years. And remember, I think the work accomplishments and the things that happened are great to remember. But the personal friendships, the wines that I've discovered thanks to Helen and others. The movers came last week and took about 350 bottles of Tuscan wine, hopefully off to my next destination. Properly stored, Helen, don't worry. And so, that kind of thing, that everywhere I go, I try to make connections and have, relationships that allow me to learn something about the local culture and really get deep into it. And so that's personally the most satisfying aspect of my 3 years.
It's great. I saw that you, when you first got here, that you quickly, became an expert on bistecca fiorentina and started worrying about the vendemmia.
Of course. Yeah. These are the only things you really need to think about. And so, so there'll be no more bistecca, but I will say wherever I've been in Southeast Asia, there's always been an expatriate Italian or two that have opened a restaurant that do pretty good Italian food. So I think I'll manage to rustle up some good food and wine even in Cambodia.
Wonderful.
Your favorite spots in Florence or in the countryside?
Well, again, it's hard to choose just a few. We've, we always like places. In Florence, there are a lot of places to choose from, but we like places like Fratelli Briganti, which is a sort of old school place out near the train station. Statuto. We like, we love Osteria di Giovanni downtown here. We've had a long-standing relationship with them. Zeb over by San Nicolo. Those are places that sort of our go-to places. I was pleased to see, I was here 10 years ago when I was in Milan, and my wife was the Consul General here. But I was pleased to see a lot more seafood restaurants compared to 10 years ago. So, we really like the Marino di Santo Spirito, Burro e Ciughe. So, and then in the countryside, we love going down to Gaiole. That was probably our favorite sort of getaway spot. We love the wines down there and some really nice winery restaurants. But there are tons. It's impossible. I'm panicking now just thinking about it, because now I've got only 30 meals left to play with. It's too much pressure.
Fantastic. I have just a question on, any recommendations for your successor, just as far as maybe dealing with the bureaucracy here or the spirit here, or
Well, this job is easy because there are so many connections already made. The trick is to just meet a lot of different people, make yourself available, figure out what links are already in place, and then decide if the consulate can add value. Consulates tend to have very good convening power. We tend to know a lot of different people in a lot of different sectors, so we can sort of see connections that may not be immediately apparent. But just to not try to build things from scratch, but just take advantage of all the amazing connections that exist, whether it's in the business world, in the art world, and politically. So that would be my advice. Just really meet a lot of people, figure out where the linkages are, figure out where we can maybe try to add some value, and then prioritize, because again, we have a small team and a huge number of things that we could be doing. So try to choose, 3 or 4 things that you really want to focus on, and go for it. You can't go wrong. You can't go wrong.
Yeah, no, I think it's a fantastic place to be.
No
a
doubt.
little bit of different times, but
but even in these times, I think the strength of a relationship really comes to the surface in difficult times. It's easy to say nice things when everyone's in good shape and the economies are purring along. But as I said, it was very reassuring to me to see, even in the midst of this crisis, that American companies were stepping right up and contributing. Italian companies were investing in the United States and creating jobs in the U.S. with huge unemployment problem back home. And seeing the U.S. government continue to show its support, both emotionally but also tangibly during this time. So that gave me the courage to carry on, to see these relationships continue to flourish even in really difficult moments.
And what would you say were your main challenges here?
Well, I think the challenge is, as I said, prioritization is a challenge. It's more sort of a resource challenge. We have a small operation here, but as I was saying about the Bicentennial celebration, we always got such a great response from partners and friends around the district, even folks that we didn't necessarily have a long-standing relationship with, kind of came out of the woodwork to volunteer and to suggest something. So the challenge maybe is just to make sure you're as present as you can be, and I suppose that's a regret too, that with the lockdown and the travel restrictions, I'm not going to be able to make a trip to all of the provinces in Tuscany and Emilia-Romagna that I've been responsible for, to say goodbye to people, and so that's unfortunate, but nothing to be done about that, unfortunately. And a good thing for my successor to pick up on and keep traveling. But as much as this is the Florentine and the consulates in Florence, and Florence is super important, getting out and really learning about the rest of the consular district will make the experience here a lot richer, and you'll serve American interests a lot better.
Jane, if there's, probably have time for one last question.
Okay, well, I suppose it's quite a big question, but perhaps you could give a quick summary. Someone has asked, as Americans, what is required to move or live in Italy? Perhaps you could give a little overview of the first steps.
Well, I would say this guy here is probably better suited to answer the question. It really is something that you need to look at carefully and talk to some people who've done it. We, as diplomats, we move and live in Italy in kind of a different way than folks who are wanting to come and settle down for other reasons. For now, it's difficult. Now it's pretty well impossible for Americans to visit Italy. But I think that's going to change, soon, I hope anyway. And so you'll be able to follow through on this. But I will say, if you do come to Italy to move here or just as a visitor, please register with the consulate, step.gov. It's good for us to know who you are and where you are. We don't track you or follow you, but for instance, if there's a pandemic, we can be in touch with you and let you know the latest information as soon as possible. And of course, follow us on Twitter and Facebook. at USCG Florence in both cases. We have a lot of good information that we push out through those channels, as well as just kind of interesting stories about what Americans are up to across the district.
Perfect. Thank you.
That pretty much sums that up. I just want to say thank you and really appreciate how open and willing you've been to just meet with the community, talk about what you do. I think a lot of people, it's been very informative, and everyone's been really appreciative of that.
Well, thank you for the opportunities. I really appreciate that. And please be as nice to my successor as you've been to me.
And thank you, Jane, and thank you everyone for tuning in.
Thank you. Thank you.
For the next one. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.